Welcome to Democrats Abroad, October Climate Café, where we will explore the important opportunity for climate action in faith-based organizations. I'm Jana Freeling, the chair of DA's Environment and Climate Crisis Council. I'm a Texas voter, and I reside in Finland. This Climate Cafe finds us at the eve of our 2025 elections, where important seats are in the balance up and down the ballot in several key states. I can't be remiss in reminding you that if you are eligible to vote in any of these states, there's New Jersey, Virginia, Texas, California, and a few more that are just vital. Please make sure your ballots are returned on time. If you're experiencing any difficulties or have questions, visit votefromabroad.org. At the top of the page, you will see a link for all kinds of help, in-person help, email help. We are here to help. So today's special guest for our Climate Cafe is Jack Angus Nevin. He is the chair of Democrats Abroad Scotland and the coordinator for net zero innovation at the Scottish Episcopal Church. Jack's presentation will explore the how and the why of decarbonizing faith-based institutions like the church. I have been enthusiastically awaiting this discussion as we can employ our religious organizations as catalysts for climate action rather than just being an impediment. I'm also delighted and so proud to have such a talented, engaged, and young Democrats Abroad leader blazing the trail in this domain. Jack Angus Nevin hails from Connecticut, and he, as I said, is the chair of Democrats Abroad Scotland, and he's been involved with Democrats Abroad, both in Scotland and Belgium, in various ways for nearly 10 years. Jack has an academic background in environmental policy analysis and development. He has spent his career working in the environmental sector in Scotland and is currently the Net Zero Innovation Coordinator for the Scottish Episcopal Church. In this role, he works within a team to decarbonize the third largest religion in Scotland, developing policy, administering training, and procuring funding while adapting heritage buildings and creating faith-based community change. So with that, I would delighted to hand the floor to you, Jack. Take it away.
Well, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Let me just share my screen, make sure I'm doing this correctly. Okay, hopefully you can see my presentation and not my notes as well. Well, what else is there really to say from introduction after all that kind intro from Dana? Thank you. My name is Jack, and I'm here to talk about the decarbonization of the church and faith-based climate action generally. To start off, and I guess continue to expand on that introduction which has already been given, I'm from quite a small town in Scotland. I've been living abroad since 2016 and involved with Democrats overseas at St Andrews, Democrats Abroad Belgium, and I've been the chair of Democrats Abroad here in Scotland since March of this year. I'm a graduate of the University of St Andrews, University of Edinburgh, and KU Leuven, and I studied various policy-related things across those degrees. And that all lends itself to a passion for environmental policy and governance and an interest in heritage and art, which I guess intersect in this field and in this job specifically for me. So I wanted to start off providing some context and caveats, context on the role of environmental work in Scotland, on what the church is, what the makeup of the church is that I work for, and what it is that I do. But I also want to caveat this, that I created this presentation wanting to provide you kind of with the theoretical and motivating background behind what led to the Scottish Episcopal Church deciding to set a target of net zero by 2030. I wanted to provide that information because I think it's useful and interesting, but I also wanted to not make this conversation too myopic and able to lend itself to a later discussion in the second half of this as to how we can see how this work could take place across various denominations or expressions of faith. So to start that all off, as has been said, I'm the Net Zero Innovation Coordinator for the Scottish Episcopal Church. The Scottish Episcopal Church, or as I'll probably say from here on, SEC, is the first church in Scotland to set a target for net zero, and as such, it's somewhat groundbreaking work. There is similar work going on in England, led by the Church of England at a much larger scale, but within Scotland, we're currently the only religion forging this path. What I do is I handle training, funding guidance, technological recommendation, and policy development, among other various job roles which shift. We, as a team, so a net zero team, work ecumenically throughout all sorts of different denominations and religions, essentially providing support to any churches who want to get in touch with us. That said, I'm more intimately familiar with the inner workings of this church from a professional sense anyway, and everything I do and what I'll say in this presentation doesn't necessarily apply to other faiths. So the SEC is the Anglican Church in Scotland, and you may know the Episcopal Church in the US. Actually, the Scottish Episcopal Church played a very big role in the formation of the American Episcopal Church. What Episcopal means kind of is that bishops get authority from other bishops. And so when there was a desire to start the Episcopal Church in the United States, the leading figures of that time came over to England and asked the bishops of the Church of England whether they would help start a church in America. This was just a few years after the Revolution. The bishops in England didn't want any part of that. So Samuel Seabury, who's the leader of the American Episcopal movement, went up to Scotland, and the bishops in Scotland had absolutely no problem at all doing that. So there's very strong links still between the Episcopal Church in America and the Scottish Episcopal Church here. So the Episcopal Church in America, the SEC here, Church of England, the Worldwide Anglican Communion, and they're represented all over the world in different denominations in, I would think, many, if not most, countries of the world. As has been said, we're the third largest religion in the country with about 300 individual churches. The church operates somewhat uniquely, at least in Scotland, in that each individual church is their own independently registered charity. Therefore, while we set priorities and targets and goals at the top level and have certain standards relating to property and finance, charges are ultimately responsible for their own initiatives and actions. And charges means churches within the context of the SEC, and I'll probably slip into saying that accidentally through this. And just to briefly touch on the environmental context of Scotland, Scotland has a legally binding target to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045, set by the Climate Change Act, Emissions Reduction Target Scotland Act of 2024. This act passed with support from all of the parties in our parliament, and there's, I believe, 6 currently represented in our parliament, and the government is set to shortly release their next climate change plan to map the way to 2030. Government response includes a wide array of work, which reflects quite a diverse country in terms of our large rural expanse, our urban centers, and our energy connections, both with clean renewable energy and, of course, the wealth of oil, which we have in the North Sea as well. So that includes things like 5-year carbon budgets, public engagement, a just transition being really key within it, and sectoral plans for areas like agriculture, transport, and peatland. And of course, you may know that we hosted COP26 in Glasgow in 2022. So the Scottish Episcopal Church Net Zero Action Plan 2023 to 2030 answers the call of a 2020 General Synod, which is the annual meeting of the church, motion calling for, quote, urgent action in relation to the global climate emergency by bringing forward a program of actions to resource the Episcopal Church in working towards achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2030. As a professional team, we use this plan, which was created as our framework, and as a team, we operate much like a civil service would from the governance perspective. Our team is made up of 6 members, and we have a diverse array of competences, including data, empowerment, and coordination. We work on the national level, and we're all also individually immersed within each of the 7 dioceses of the church, working specifically with individual churches. Many churches are already leading the way and have been doing so for many years now. And as we move forward, we aim to organize a program which highlights and uplifts churches already acting as pioneers, showcasing their work and the lessons learned so that others can collaboratively implement the best practice obtained through their approaches. And that's reflective of a really community-minded approach in what we're doing and working very locally in trying to build a national movement. The action plan which guides us is not a document that provides churches a step-by-step guide on how they might work towards net zero. The practical plan is a living work which evolves and is custom fit and implemented as we identify needs and opportunities. The vision of the net zero future that we have as a church is formed by a variety of moralistic and practical strategies. What makes up this vision, informing our work, are the principles of a moral imperative to act with urgency, an ecologically sound approach, a fabric-first approach, making use of technologically viable solutions, maintaining financial prudence, and ensuring carbon credibility. From these principles, 3 high-level goals are then outlined. One is to support clergy and vestries, which are the volunteer board of members of a church which look after the administration of a church, to support them with the resources and tools they need every step of the way. 2, to work towards reducing absolute carbon emissions by 90% by 2030 based on our 2018 baseline. And 3, to significantly reduce operational costs through energy demand reduction and energy efficiency measures while assisting charges to unlock external funding. The values which have guided the Net Zero Action Plan are discipleship, justice, and hope. Our approach to tackling the significant challenge of net zero 2030 is guided by these 3 Christian values. As we join together in this shared journey, it's hoped that they will also sustain us for the way ahead. These are the lens through which we take on the task of a net zero future, ensuring that these fundamental values guide and inform everything we do. And to briefly expand on these, discipleship. As disciples, we're called to live out the teachings of Jesus in our everyday lives, following the call for advocacy of love, justice, and compassion in the world, and responding in the ways that imitate the life of Christ in our thoughts, words, and deeds. Discipleship is, in the words of former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, about going on asking whether what we do, how we think, and speak and act is open to Christ and Christ's Spirit, developing the skills of asking ourselves the difficult questions about our consistency and honesty, about how seriously we take what we say. We acknowledge that this calling is not about one-off net zero fixes, but about the active and continuous participation in the transformation of the world, fusing our lives into alignment with Christ. As disciples, we are called to protect and care for God's creation and to hold steadfastly to the Anglican Communion's 5th mark of mission, which is, quote, to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. Justice. We embrace the command to love your neighbor as yourself, acknowledging that powering our churches with fossil fuels and continuing church as usual is causing devastating impacts on our fellow brothers and sisters across the world. We want to bring the voice of those on the receiving end of climate change into the room, recognizing that those most affected by the climate emergency, as in those that have done the least to cause it, do not have the luxury of choice. In doing so, we acknowledge the radical discrepancy between those who have a say and those who feel the pain. We therefore stand in solidarity with those most impacted by the climate crisis. We also support the people in Scotland whose health and livelihoods are impacted by air pollution, as well as the financial cost of the transition to net zero. In this regard, we support a fair and just transition for the people of Scotland, ensuring that as we navigate towards a regenerative future, this is done in an equitable way, materially enhancing the livelihoods and well-being of all people. And finally, hope. In the face of the climate crisis and intense sufferings of the world, it's easy to become overwhelmed with despair. Our work as disciples is to find the hope that pulls us ever forward while contending with the grief of the world. We recognize that hope is not a state of mind passively accepted, but a radical act of faith which comes through active choices and decisions that we make and in the actions we undertake. We work to support and inspire each other, remembering that we're not alone in this struggle and that we can always make a difference together. We always hold in faith that through focused effort, we can make a positive impact in the world and that a flourishing future is possible. These values inform how this plan has been constructed. Discipleship calls us to be steadfast advocates for justice and compassion and to take action urgently to protect the planet and its inhabitants. Justice requires that those most affected by the climate crisis are considered in every decision we take. And hope encourages us to find strength in the midst of uncertainty, to trust in universal love, and to keep working for a flourishing future. So our vision of 2030 is of that flourishing future for the whole church. The Net Zero Action Plan lays out a positive future for the church at tackling head-on the UN triple planetary crises of climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, and pollution. With unerring focus and dedicated resource, we can address these challenges, transforming the operations of the Scottish Episcopal Church to act in harmony with the living ecosystems it resides. And just to expand on that vision, some of our top-level priorities for 2030 include realizing what I already mentioned, the fifth mark of mission, to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth, embedding the principles of discipleship, justice, and hope in all that we do, giving a voice to those on the receiving end of climate change and supporting a just transition for the people of Scotland. Another is to ensure our churches and ancillary halls are resilient places of warm welcome at the heart of the communities they serve, with lower operational costs and being powered by renewable energy. We also hope that our rectories will be warmer, lowering costs for clergy and contributing to their well-being. Another priority is that the land that we care for is rich in biodiversity, providing places of refuge and calm for nature to thrive. Additionally, the products and services that we use will be carefully considered based on the principles of reject, reduce, reuse, recycle, and restore. We will become a zero-waste church contributing to the circular economy. We are a climate literate church, fully understanding the systemic link between climate change and biodiversity loss, acknowledging that climate change and biodiversity loss are part of a wider set of planetary boundaries which we must seek to not transgress further. Our worship will be rooted, rejoicing in our interdependence within the ecosystems of creation. We will maintain a prudent and holistic approach to finance, embedding climate justice in all of the financial decisions we take. We're part of a broader movement of change, both nationally and internationally, resolute in our call for systemic change within the current cultural milieu in which we live and move and have our being. We are a church that maintains a credible voice for justice in the world, being an active part of the solution in Scotland's journey to net zero and taking a leadership role in the process. And finally, we are beacons of hope in action, actively participating in the process of healing creation. Our intent is that with this hope-filled vision, each diocese in charge will take it on among themselves to adapt it and make it their own, contextualizing it for their individual mission while transforming it into living practice. This plan has been a call for the whole church to draw together in a hope-filled passion, using its collective energy and determination to make a flourishing future a reality. So the practical administration of this, the 10-point plan, the petals. So 5 elements of this are tangible pieces of work, and the other 5 are intangible. Normally when having these conversations, I don't have a presentation in front of me, so I'm usually trying to see if I can remember all of them. And I can say that I usually do get all of them at this point. I do have the benefit that I can just read it off this, so it's not that impressive me just listing it off, but just to let you know that I could do that if I had to. Um, so the tangible elements of it, so what we are physically doing are relating to energy efficiency improvements, clean energy, thriving biodiversity, active travel, and zero waste. And then the other elements of what we're administering and implementing across the church intangibly on the top level, but of course these do become tangible actions. Shared governance, training and education, rooted worship, positive finance, and building a movement. In isolation, each of these 10 objectives are an important element on how change can happen. Together, though, they reinforce each other and are a recipe for transformation which can empower the church to reach net zero in ways that bring about a flourishing future. Many of these objectives are the collective work of different committees and bodies within the church, out with or outside just the net zero team, coming together to tackle the climate emergency. So that's things like building committees or parliamentary committees and that. Each objective outlines a set of resources which have been created to empower clergy and vestries to continue to take the steps required to work towards net zero. Our intent in using this 10-point framework is to enable the core objectives to connect seamlessly within this 5-point structure of the resourcing, both financial and personnel, of the project and of the team. To prepare the church not only to meet the challenge of net zero by 2030, but to provide the provision for looking at additional scopes of emissions inclusion post 2030, such as the rest of Scope 3 emissions, which would include things like products and services, as well as waste and water. And as well to provide a holistic approach to change, recognizing that all of these objectives intertwine with positive reinforcing elements of feedback between them. And each of these 10 points, or 10 petals, as we sometimes call them, have their own individual timelines and strategies for marking their progress and success. I can say that just 2 years into this project, not all of the elements of the petals are as in the focus as others at this point. But as we move on, focus, I believe, will shift from petal to petal. I think particularly now it's energy efficiency and clean energy. We're trying to get these projects off the ground in churches, get boilers out, put clean energy generation sources in, and looking at things like shared governance and positive finance. But as we move on, I know that biodiversity will be taking more of a front seat, and so will other things as well. So that's a lot of top level talk about values and priorities and strategies and that, but what does this actually involve? I tried to throw a few pictures on here to give a bit of a spread of what we're doing. And there's more pictures later on as well, because I know that that's probably the most effective way to convey this. But just to remind everyone that net zero in simple terms is where greenhouse gases are released into the atmosphere, being balanced by their removal out of the atmosphere. As a church, we measure Scope 1 emissions, so the emissions which are directly emitted by our buildings, through the use of a tool licensed from our sibling church of the Church of England called the Energy Footprint Tool. We use energy bills to calculate emissions, and we both rely on volunteers and develop figures ourselves. So for the past 2 years now, we've been developing data that we now have, which covers nearly every one of those 300 churches within the country, and are using that data to be able to track areas of focus, areas of success, and collate information across various forms of heating that we can use to better develop our strategies. Churches, country like Scotland, are some of the most inefficient buildings, naturally, but this isn't an immutable factor. They're also some of the oldest buildings which we still regularly use. If you think about the schools, the hospitals, the stores that we use, maybe if you're in a city like Edinburgh, where I live, we are using some buildings from 200, 250 years ago. But with a church, you're going back sometimes 300, 400 years. That isn't so much the case with the Episcopal Church. Most of our churches are about 200 years old, but that said, they're still some of the most inefficient buildings naturally. But we are able to take active interventions, which do result in incredible strides in terms of efficiency, looking at both the physical fabric of the building and also the use, how the building is used. From solar panels on churches, which you can see there at the bottom, to radiant chandeliers, which I'll show you a bit later on, to heat pumps and various energy efficiency projects, churches are taking action. I'm actually going on a site visit next week to visit a church that wants to put a wind turbine right next to their church, which, to my knowledge, would be the first in the country. And I still struggle to imagine that visually, but churches are really taking ingenious steps to try to take ownership of their response to the climate crisis and their energy solutions. A major part of our program and our ethos is to encourage local action, and we try to empower communities through various training methods with a regular program of online webinars serving the whole country and a strong support network of in-person events, with a great mix of the focus of that being on empowerment and also local development work. And you can see some pictures of that stuff there. We've also developed internal grant systems and assist charges in making external applications for funds in order to fund flexible projects all over the country. We enable charges to develop the skills and confidence to make technological decisions and take projects forward, which is honestly easier said than done. I think the most heartening part of this whole project is the unrelenting and positive diligence and dedication which the volunteers and individual churches dedicate to taking ownership of projects within their individual community. These are often people that don't have backgrounds in project management or engineering or carpentry or fund applications or any of these things. Being realistic, looking at a church demographic, they're typically retired people who maybe do have experience with this, but often don't. So they're taking on something completely in their own time. Again, maybe not with the relevant background, but they're really committing a lot of their energy to learning and developing competent and capacity-based skills, which you do see result in progress. As a net zero program as well, we're involved in with various interdenominational and sectoral groups, such as two you can see on the bottom here, Eco Congregation Scotland and Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, which act as pressure and campaign groups across very, very many different bodies in Scotland, Eco Congregation being faith-based and then Stop Climate Chaos being multi-sectoral based of wildlife and faith and heritage and marine life and all sorts of different things, just really anything that makes up the social domain to continue to fight for climate action in Scotland and make sure that it's at the top of the agenda. So there's a lot of challenges to this. It's not all just rosy, and the sheer grit and determination isn't enough often to bring a project forward. It does require a lot of challenge mitigation. I don't think anything here really would be too surprising in terms of what you may think a challenge for a project like this would be, but the main challenges are adapting heritage buildings, capacity within individual communities and congregations, and unlocking funding for physical building improvements. In addition to these other things on the screen here, like typical building maintenance concerns of water ingress, damp, guttering. That does have to do with climate change. Obviously, Scotland is already a wet country, but as time moves on, we're becoming wetter and wetter, and churches built in the 1820s don't have guttering and roofing systems that are really there, that they can handle all of that water. And so just keeping on top of building maintenance and taking a fabric first approach is something which draws a lot of energy from volunteers and takes away from doing additional work aside from just keeping the church warm. that also goes into heritage concerns as well, but that is there due to people having to validly consider whether a heat pump is appropriate in a small rural church built in the 1750s, or solar panels, and just taking an individual look at each building to see what is appropriate. And then there's capacity demographics there. These are additionally quite straightforward in terms of what you would imagine with volunteer capacity at a church and what we may think volunteer capacity will be in 10, 15 years from now. As this plan was agreed as a democratic vote at a synodial meeting of the church, as I mentioned, we don't have to deal with institutional pushback, thankfully, so we're an integrated element of church operations. Of course, there's going to be degrees of varying opinion on various specific elements of the plan across the hundreds, thousands of people that are involved in running these churches throughout the whole country. Thankfully, this hasn't presented an existential issue. And when extreme climate skepticism does present itself, I can speak from personal experience that it can be isolated and personally responded to. I find, generally speaking, but particularly within these conversations, that the argument of environmental sustainability supporting organizational sustainability, i.e., warmer churches, lower cost, more relevant / modern church, attracting people that are looking for faith in a way that connects with their values, perhaps, and better, more useful spaces for community is a very effective argument. Sometimes when I go to a church, I'm not really talking about the net zero agenda so much because I know that that's not necessarily how we would affect a successful outcome, but talking about how to lower the costs for a building, how to have it open more times in a week and make it a more useful space in a community. It's not really something you can argue with, particularly if there's someone who's there to help you with it. So these challenges here impact us, but they're also the major challenges facing churches generally, even really out with net zero concerns. So we're kind of seeing net zero and sustainability as a response to these challenges rather than these challenges hampering us too much. So nearing the end, I wanted to touch on our website, which I will put in the chat as soon as I'm done sharing. But it's quite simple and snappy, and you may even remember it, netzerochurch.scot. It's the only website of its kind in Scotland, and it is providing nationally leading information on things like funding, like realistic and reliable and appropriate funding sources for church building projects, a really robust resource section and all sorts of things like technology, but also capacity building and empowerment. We've got a blog of good news case stories from all over the country, from the Borders to Shetland, to the Western Isles, to the Northeast Coast, Glasgow and Edinburgh and everywhere in between. And we've got a newsletter as well. So when I put that link, if you'd be interested in learning more or just keeping up to date with the various events or new improvements that churches are doing all over Scotland, you'd be welcome to sign up to that and get that information. So before I end, just to share some good news, not to go into too much depth into any of this specifically, but we are seeing things move at pace. And as such, I wanted to put a few examples of positive action and movement across our various areas of focus. So we are getting funding released to churches from a very wide array of external sources, not just governmental, but charitable, local government, all sorts of different trusts and that. And we are using that funding to push boundaries and putting things like solar panels on churches and creating a change in community in terms of what people think when they see solar panels on church, because it has been something that you need to create cultural change really to make acceptable and to even get the planning permission for. We're adapting buildings so that they're more sustainable and useful by congregations. Therefore, we're creating better outcomes and creating better spaces by putting in more sustainable options and lowering bills as well. We're making clergy housing more sustainable and comfortable. with better efficiency and better living conditions for the people that are working in these individual communities. We are reducing emissions by investing in clean energy, and that's things like switching to green tariffs, which we see in Scotland at least result in an 87% reduction of emissions, but also with homegrown energy, so to speak, as well. Active travel. That picture there is from the blessing of a bike rack. The Bishop of Edinburgh that blessed a range of bike racks at a church in South Edinburgh. We're seeing that kind of community change as well, have that come on board and have that in the thought process of a church. If you put bike racks, maybe people that wouldn't have come otherwise now have a place to lock up their bike and maybe they'll come, or maybe it'll just be a well-used space within the community and therefore the church can serve in a different way as well. So just generally encouraging more sustainable travel patterns. These middle bottom two, fostering community-based action, speaking up for climate, and empowering communities to take action on the local level themselves, because everyone has a voice and we're empowering every member of our communities to speak up. And biodiversity, as I say, it hasn't really been a major focus for us just yet, but I'm really looking forward to continuing to encourage the most productive use of green space. And that already is something which many churches are doing on their own. So to conclude, I wanted to share our positive look to the future. We have such wonderful heritage with our buildings, but we have a real responsibility not just to our communities, to Scotland, but on the global level. And that picture is one of our beautiful churches, I think near Fort William in the Highlands. And I think that just really sums up the juxtaposition of what so many of our communities are like, with the Victorian buildings right next to a loch and the lands of the Highlands. So really working to protect nature is not a faraway thought for many of our individual communities. Grounded in the values of discipleship, justice, and hope, it's a positive journey that we're on, and we as an institutional team are providing help at the highest and lowest levels. So much of my work is spent on the phone or huddled with a cup of coffee in a cold church in rural Scotland with a bunch of elderly volunteers. I'm bowled over by the positivity, commitment, and dedication of all the volunteers that I work with. It's really so heartening and refreshing, honestly, to work in this job and be implementing such a positive climate action response plan, particularly in light of so many rollbacks, a really frightening lessening in valuation of climate response that we see in both industry, in private business, and governance all over the world, and even in Scotland as well. We're happy to support other denominations, and we work ecumenically, and we hope that other churches are watching and learning from us in Scotland, but across the British Isles and Europe. And we hope that our work will get people inspired with positive perspective of climate action. To speak personally, I think that we will achieve our target of reaching net zero by 2030. It's going to be a massive push to do it, but this is only possible to the remarkable and inspiring level of positive commitment from our volunteers. And that is the end of my prepared remarks, but I'd be honestly very interested and very happy to have a discussion with anyone and answer questions and everything.
Thank you so much, Jack. And in true Democrats Abroad tradition, if you have a question, I'm sure all of you do. I have tons of questions. Wonderful presentation. Please type star hand up so we can start a queue of who wants to ask a question. I'm going to start it off. Being very selfish here. I would love to know more about the nuts and bolts of what you do daily. You said you sit with a cup of coffee, but what is really involved? I mean, you've told us the different areas that you need to tackle, but how do you, as a coordinator, logistically go about doing this? And also, what is your volunteer base across the country?
Yeah, so what I do on a day-to-day basis naturally varies quite greatly. From this 10-point plan, we have various areas that we focus on as priorities. So right now we've been really working on sustainable travel as our current priority. So we've been writing policy to distribute to churches and are going to probably next week at this point be putting live a sustainable travel grant, which allows up to £1,500 for the implementation of sustainable travel support materials, bike racks, EV charging point, bikes for a church. Well, really, the format for that is very open-ended, so anyone that has any idea can submit something for that. So that's a microcosm of general development work. But as I said, myself and my team are embedded within the 7 dioceses. I'm responsible for 2 of the 7 dioceses, and my 2 make up the northeast of Scotland. And across those 2, I've got about 67 churches that I'm their point of contact. And I go and visit all of these churches and develop projects of panels here, heat pump there, efficiency measures, and all of those holes and rectories as well. So it's a great mix of traveling very often across the country to support individual churches or do training things. I was in Inverness last weekend, and then doing more policy development work, but that's also not to mention the advocacy work or trying to implement change on a national level. So working with heritage bodies or sustainable bodies as well. The second question, what's the volunteer base like? It varies really greatly because the churches are very much community-based organizations. So if you have a church in a city, you'll have typically more people going, and therefore you're probably able to draw on a greater base of people. And if you're in a rural area, you're probably already dealing with having lower numbers, and you're having to work with a lower base of volunteers that are connected with that building. We are thankful for the people that decide to step up and take responsibility and work collaboratively to develop projects for their individual community. And in a way, we're kind of at the mercy of what we're lucky enough to have in each place. And sometimes you need to wait for someone to join the church that has that engineering background or something for things to really get going. Because this is a very interestingly applied plan where it's top down but also bottom up, where we need these people in the individual churches to be able to take a project forward and to be supported by us. It's a symbiotic relationship, I think, where we really need them, and I would like to think that we provide support that they need as well. But it looks different everywhere.
Everybody has got their hands raised. You have a long queue of people waiting to ask questions, so I'm not going to hog you anymore. I think Alexander is the first in line. He was first with his hand. So you, Alexander?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
From across the puddle. So do you work with the Catholic Church in Scotland as well? Is there a parallel effort in?
Well, I'm actually a Catholic myself, which was interesting at first, working for a different church. Unfortunately, in Scotland, there isn't a organized movement so much. The bishops of Scotland sometimes sign on to various climate-related things. I know they just signed on to a no proliferation treaty, but there isn't, as far as I'm aware of, a program nationally.
And can you talk more about what rooted worship is, and then I won't ask any more questions.
Yeah. So rooted worship is really trying to make sure that the reason that we're doing all of this climate action isn't lost in the modern conversations of just doing it for the sake of sustainability, but from the perspective of stewardship and caring for creation. There are various administrative apparatuses within the church, like a liturgy committee, and we work with them to, well, really, we are in support of what they develop in terms of developing liturgical material for like the season of creation or having a climate Sunday, or just the provision of worship and liturgy, ensuring that the gratitude for creation is remembered within the general goings on of church services. So the reason that we're putting solar panels on a church is not just to meet a net zero target, but it's because it's a tangible action taken to continue to support the mission of stewardship. And being not an Anglican myself, I can't really speak to the depth necessarily, or the diversity of how that may be applied, but that kind of gives you the gist of it.
Thank you. You're muted, Dana.
We have Naomi next. If Naomi would like to ask a question, you want to unmute and
Yes. Thank you, Dana, and thanks very much for the interesting presentation. So my question is really related to stewardship. And I'm wondering if you have considered incorporating reciprocity or the rights of nature into a coexistence thought process in what you offer. Thank you.
I would have to say I haven't been involved in any conversations which touch on that directly. I think it's an interesting idea, and one that I wouldn't think would be out of step probably with the ways of thinking in the higher levels of the church. I know that we are hoping to develop plans in the future to work with other churches globally, part of the Anglican Communion, particularly places like the Diocese of Amazonia, like the Amazon in Brazil. And I don't know what that type of partnership would look like, but I feel like maybe those conversations would factor into that. But as of now, that hasn't really been something that we've discussed, but I will keep that in mind and take it back.
Well, especially if you are considering going into communities where there is an indigenous population. And reciprocity is an underpinning of how indigenous communities coexist with the environment in which that they inhabit. So if you are considering expanding the network, and there are viable indigenous communities, then this would be a critical element to consider and include. Thank you.
Thanks, Naomi. I always appreciate your input. It is an interesting challenge and an important challenge. How do we expand the role, not just of the Episcopal Church, or that it actually can be a part of faith-based organizations, regardless of the faith, that religious institutions can all be stewards of the environment.
Yes, faith has many faces.
Many faces. Kristen is up next with a question.
Thanks,
Kristen?
Dana. Thanks, Jack, for the presentation. Really impressed with the work that you're doing, and you speak about it very well. I have two questions. The first one is kind of similar to the questions that were just asked, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'm wondering if you know to what extent in the US is there this movement by churches to become involved in the, environmental or climate change movement and make a positive impact. I know at least there's some because I've seen some doing work in the area. And my second question is whether the work you're doing is aligned with broader initiatives in terms of like government initiatives or regional initiatives in the country? Thank you.
I think I'll answer the second question first, because the first bit of the question, I'm not so well briefed on the goings on in America, but Alexander may be able to speak on that. So I'll just answer if we're keeping in line with governmental programs and that. Yes and no, and I'd say we're not. We're moving ahead. I dropped it in that Scotland has a target of net zero by 2045. I believe they had an earlier target until a year and a half or 2 years ago, and they pushed it back. So we are operating hopefully at a 15-year ahead of schedule timeline compared to the Scottish government. That said, they probably have a few more complicated things to make net zero rather than just medieval and historic church buildings. Not that they're necessarily easy either. We do key into things like the Community Energy Scotland priorities and programs, where we are working with community buildings to decarbonize them. And as much as we can, we try to harmonize and strategize with various programs of encouraging or discouraging the further proliferation of oil and gas in the North Sea and things like that. And where appropriate, we try to key into national schemes like Warm Welcome, which is using public spaces for warm places of refuge. So where we can do that in a sustainable way and bring people into buildings, those are the type of things we like to get involved in. I think faith-based spaces and heritage spaces generally do kind of fall into a crevice of they're not private spaces and they're not public spaces in many considerations. Therefore, they're often not really included within top-level strategies or theories, I guess. And where that is the case, that's something we're additionally trying to do to get rectory properties considered within a governmental provision for EPC, which is like the Environmental Performance Certificate of a house, up to standard, or funding for churches when churches are used as a nursery or as a food pantry, as well as a place of worship, like where that falls within how a government looks at that. So we're engaging, we're trying to lead the way, and then we're trying to get more involved in governmental things as well. And then I guess, Alex, if you want to say something about the American work.
I can try and be brief. I work on this stuff all the time on the Boston Catholic Climate Covenant or steering committee, or climate movement steering committee. We work with the Catholic Climate Covenant and Laudato Si movement, which are actual organizations. Our chair just went over, and she's in her late 80s and was Bill McKibben's teacher in Lexington, and met with the Pope. So pretty exciting. So I'm very steeped in the Catholic side of things, but I have worked since I was, and I'm 51, in my early 20s with Interfaith Power and Light, which started out as Episcopal Power and Light, and their national folded up this year, but they have active state chapters and less active state chapters around the nation. I posted something in the chat about Green Faith. That's another effort that's quite political. And we've all been working together with 350.org and Third Act for the Solar Sunday this past September, which was I think an international thing, but mostly based in the United States. So there are different aspects that are happening here. The state of Massachusetts, where I live, is and the utility companies are excited about helping churches at this point, which is great with their utility programs, although a lot of that money is now drying up. So like we hurried to get our church insulated last year and our rectory. I don't know if that's helpful or if that's the kind of information you're looking for, but
yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you. That's great.
Yep.
Alexander's been doing inspirational work for a long time. and
Yeah, it sounds like
also
it.
been a pivotal figure in helping us form our council. Once upon a time, Alexander moved from China a couple of years ago.
Yep.
He was based in
Okay, so now you're back in the US, is that right?
I'm back in the
So
US
you're
with
like a
my
DA
Chinese family.
alumni.
And I'm a DA alumni. That's right. Yeah,
Great. Okay, cool. Well, that explains why I don't think I've met you before, but great to meet you now.
We have still have a list of people waiting to ask questions. Angela is next. Angela?
Well, I didn't want to ask a question so much as to thank you for this presentation. It restores my faith in humanity that there's actually churches that care about climate change. Same to you, Alexander. That's just really very nice. Thank you so much. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
It is wonderful. I was
Yeah.
inspired and delighted when we got to know each other and that you could come on and talk about your efforts, which I hope spread quickly around the world across every faith.
It
Thank you
is.
so much, Jack.
It is very, as I said, refreshing to work for such a positive organization with such a hope-filled vision. When I attend some of these sectoral things, like I mentioned, so many colleagues across the sustainability network and industry are often so, I guess, frenzied or concerned because they're dealing with cut budgets, cut timelines, etc. And to work for an organization where they sorry, there's a package at my door, or there's someone at my door. I need to open the door. But it's nice to work for a place where there's commitment to timelines and that.
Olaf has had his hand up for quite some time. Olaf, nice to have you today. Where are you calling in from, and what is your question?
I'm calling in from Berlin, Germany. Thanks, Jack, for your wonderful presentation. I know you're like in cold Scotland, and you mentioned that it's a challenge to actually heat up those 300-year-old churches. Here in Berlin, actually, because we deal with the urban heat island effect, some of our churches are becoming cooling centers during the summer. So I'm just curious if maybe like Edinburgh or Glasgow, being like urban centers, if you use the churches as cooling centers during this hot summer months. The other question I had was more about sort of the message that faith-based organizations can bring to the climate crisis. Churches in Berlin have so-called climate political night prayers, where they leave the church and go out into the hoods and look at projects, green facades, solar panels, and kind of bring the message of both hope but also despair and anger that is part of the community dealing with sort of the climate challenge. So maybe you can talk about the kind of outreach that your church is doing, and then the first one about cooling centers. Thanks.
Yeah. So the answer for the cooling centers, Scotland as a country does not really get that hot. That's not to say we don't have summer, as some people think. We do have summer, and it can get into the high 20s Celsius and maybe the 80s or so. I'm sure that individually churches have acted as cooling stations. I'm not sure that they've ever maybe advertised themselves as such, because just due to the weather in Scotland, that's just, at least at this point with our climate, it's not such a need. But I guess particularly some of the the stone medieval buildings would be very well placed to do that. With regards to work within the community, I think we see expressions of this in very many different ways across the country because we have such locally anchored climate action. There are so many different initiatives. Like I have in my mind, I wish I'd put a picture in the presentation. There was this tiny church in quite rural Aberdeenshire that were collecting tea bags for like almost a year, I think, and then they created a human-sized tea bag angel, which is absolutely terrifying to look at. But they had it part of their Christmas decorations, and it was supposed to demonstrate how much waste we're throwing away and what that can lead to. And I guess what they wanted to show was a human-sized angel made out of tea bags. Very scary. It looks like a mummy type thing, but that's just one kind of wacky example. And we see lots of different things in different churches across the country. There's a lot of churches that are very involved with the political side of things on lobbying their members of parliament. And then there's a lot as well that are very involved with art projects. There's a youth board within the church, and the leader of I forget if it's a committee or not, but gave a very impassioned speech at our General Synod last year about centering the voices of young people within our climate work, which I think we do internally. And I mentioned within the presentation that I think that can have a real impact on how the church is perceived from the outside as well, that this is a church that is of modern values and is placing the evaluation of protection of environment quite highly. So in terms of national strategy, I think due to the nature of the church, that's not necessarily how we're operating at this point, because there are so many individual community actions cropping up. But there really is so much going on, and you can learn some of that on our website as well if you want to look through the positive stories on there.
Encouraging, really. Thank you. Olaf, do you have any further on this issue?
No, thank you.
I think Dale is up next with a question.
I've written in the question just to add to it. I'm in Edinburgh as well, and I wondered if the Church of Scotland has someone like you advising their parishes, and do you coordinate with them? And I'm curious because our church, which is 140 years old or so, its heating system has died. And so they're having to redo it, and I think are going to a heating system. But what do you call it? Heat pump system. Mm. And which I understand needs good insulation to be efficient. And it's a Gothic church, rather like St. Mary's, but not as big. And and I don't know how you make these, how you insulate these churches to be efficient.
Can you help those of us who don't understand the difference between the Church of Scotland and whatever outfit you're working for?
Well, the Church of Scotland is the main church in.
Oh, it's Presbyterian? Oh,
Presbyterian, okay. Yes.
Oh, okay.
And it has its headquarters in Edinburgh.
Yeah. So a few different questions. Also great to see Dale here. Great to see someone from Democrats Abroad Scotland. Thank you for coming. Well, the answer is no, there isn't someone at the Church of Scotland who has a similar job role. The leader of our team did previously work for the Church of Scotland, I think doing similar work, but they are not taking forward net zero as a priority currently. That's not to say they're not involved with environmental work, because they're involved in some of the intersectoral groups which I mentioned, but I don't believe it's currently a massive factor in their general operations. I don't know your building specifically. a heat pump can work in uninsulatable spaces, it wouldn't necessarily be my first knee-jerk reaction or recommendation. But if, for example, they were going to have the heat pump on 24/7, then that would be fine, probably with the understanding that the heat is transferring and moving about, and to reflect on the idea of insulating some of these Gothic buildings. It isn't possible, point blank, because the changes to the aesthetics just wouldn't be permissible, really, under even law. With a heritage law for a lot of our listed buildings, it wouldn't be possible to do things like that, and it wouldn't make sense either or with regards to the financial outlay and the efficiency-based savings. So the typical principle in such a space is to heat the people, not the building. So have an understanding of where the people are in the building and use things like radiant chandeliers or electric panels. And then if you are able to insulate, then maybe a heat pump is a sensible solution. But if a heat pump is being moved forward with for your building, I think that probably that wasn't the first thing that they considered. So they must have come to a conclusion based on that, or based on whatever reasons are the factors within that context.
I'm certainly, I don't know if they know about your website, but I'll certainly let them know.
Oh, yeah, please.
Jack, what is a radiant chandelier? It's the second time you've mentioned it. Is it like a chandelier?
Yeah. So
heat
they're
moves
called
up, so how does it help?
they're called halos. I'll put a link in the chat. They're a relatively new technology that look like, well, they are a chandelier because they do have lights on them, but there's also radiant heaters, infrared heaters on the chandelier, so it heats conically. So it's both functioning as a chandelier and a heater. Send you the link. They're quite pricey, but they do definitely work in large heritage buildings. If anyone else is in Edinburgh, St. Mary's Cathedral, which is the tallest building in Edinburgh, and there's a law in the city that no building can ever be taller than it, is starting to put them in. There's one, actually, I think there's two already in their Lady Chapel, which is the side small chapel, and I believe they'll be moving forward with them across the whole building. So there's a few others in Edinburgh with them as well.
Very interesting. Kristen, I just clicked on the picture. They're also attractive.
Yeah. I think they're form made for each church that they're put into, so you can get them in different colors or with different accents on them, etc.
Kristen has another question, and then Alexander has his hand up as well. Kristen?
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I'll get to my question in a sec, but I just wanted to say, just while you were asking that, Dana, I was Googling radiant chandelier, and one of the first links that came up mentions Jack by name. So I thought that was hilarious.
Oh,
I'll
gosh,
put that link in the chat. It's heathack.org. It's talking about how you visited St. Chad's, Bradford, to look at a demonstration. So yeah, very cool. They seem to match the decor well. But I guess that's on purpose, as you said.
The picture on that article are beautiful. That church is, I'll put a link in the chat for everyone else. That's a church in England, in Bradford. And thank you, Kristen, you already did it. The chandeliers go so well with that beautiful mosaic in the back. So these modern actions, these interventions are, sometimes they can even really complement the space. And maybe there were chandeliers in that church previous, so you're keeping in keeping with the heritage of the building while making it better for the future.
Very cool. The question I had is sort of related. It's kind of an engineering-y question. I know you mentioned that in these, the buildings that you work with are generally quite old, and it's difficult to, insulate them, and a lot of them aren't very energy efficient and stuff like that. But I was wondering if there were any any elements to, the architecture or building techniques that you've noticed that are, useful. Like I know that when we look at, indigenous building techniques, for example, in the Caribbean, a lot of times the older techniques are more tailored to the climate here because they didn't have, electric air conditioning and things like that. So I was wondering if there were any techniques in these churches that were used that were, kind of beneficial for keeping people warm or any other, I guess, environmental benefit.
Yeah, I think something which we try to remind people is that for some of these buildings, they did not have heat for more time than they
Your
have
signal is breaking up.
had heat. So
We're not hearing you.
Jack, it's breaking up
getting
for
rid of
all
their
of us.
boiler and putting in something they're not as familiar with. But way is hello?
Jack, you're having connection problems. We didn't actually hear what you just said.
Can you hear me? I can
Now
hear
we
all of
can hear
you.
you. Now we can hear you. You were breaking up before.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. I think, well, the short answer is no, not really. Scotland is a cold country. It gets much colder the further north you go. And there are certain elements of our historic buildings which definitely lend themselves to resilience. A lot of the masonry and the stonework and the slate work is really supreme work that we're still using from the early 19th century. And that's great. That doesn't necessarily lend itself to energy efficiency or to, energy efficiency, keeping a building airtight and warm. And really the most pervasive thing which we have to deal with so often is dampness coming in through stonework. So I want to find a way to positively say yes to this, but the answer isn't really. There's elements that are easier to work with, I guess. But when you have Harling and stone, you kind of just have to do what you can. You can't really insulate that. So each building is different. And sometimes you do have opportunities in the roof space or in paneled wall space or in an entryway space or in a vestry space. But it's not really such. There aren't many spaces for optimism in terms of looking at architecture on its own.
Okay, thank you.
I have
Very
to, after spending a lot of time in Scotland over the last 10 years, I have to say it's generally very cold, drafty, and wet. The buildings are poorly insulated. The windows are not double glazed often.
Mhm.
I suppose the Scots that develop a stoicism and drink a lot of whiskey.
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe not all of them, but I do think people naturally acclimate. If you come from a warm country, you're more accustomed to it, but Scottish buildings are cold. I see
Those
that.
vodka drinking Finns.
Yes, we have good insulation here. But Alexander, you had another question, so the floor.
Yeah, it's a question comment, and it speaks to what Kristen was just asking about, like, heating these high ceilinged stained glass window slate roof places that can't accept solar panels has been the challenge for all the churches that we've been working with in the Boston area.
Mhm.
And so where we've had some success is with the lighting, and making sure that we're lighting the people instead of lighting the church. And so moving lights down and putting in LEDs has allowed our church to save some money, although our particular church, which is sort of a sub-cathedral, is like for times the normal amount of energy consumed for a building of similar type. And the only way we're going to be able to tackle it is to pull out that 1890s heating system and all the pipes, and that's just never going to happen. So the joke I made with the 27-year head of the finance committee at our church is that, you know, the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Seventh-day Adventists all have these like low falls, and you know that's really got to be where we're headed. Jack, does anyone have that conversation about, like, while these churches are protected by heritage laws, as you call them in the UK, you know, they're behemoths for energy consumption. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this feeds into so many things I've touched on with regards to maintenance. Some churches really are, I don't want to say they're more trouble than they're worth, because that's definitely not true in terms of the community sense, but they really do take so much attention and work. They can be behemoths, as you say. They can also have really poor placement on a hill and have flooding problems every year, or have just unending roofing and guttering issues. And they can have paper thin windows which you can't double glaze because they're stained glass or protected, and uninslatable walls. These are all issues that we try to work with. In terms of what you would say in terms of using a building for the future, that is a conversation for an individual community to have, and that's not part of our net zero plan. As in, we would never say, oh, this church just like cannot be worked on, get rid of it. It's a very difficult endeavor in that way to support communities to take action where action is very difficult. There's at least one church that I know of in the Western Isles which is sinking, and what to do with that church, which is a massive church and it's a co-cathedral of a diocese, is not I'm actually not involved in those conversations myself, but I know that those conversations must be very complicated and difficult ones. I think it's about meeting the moment. We're here in 2025, and what are the churches going to be like in 2075? Which ones are still going to be here? Who's going to be using them? How are they going to be usable? So even though they're a really difficult conversation to be had, if they aren't reckoned with, then I think that we're at the risk of losing a lot of irreplaceable heritage within Scotland, which obviously would be a tragedy. So it's both a program that we have of environmental positivity and trying to do what we can to steward creation. I think it's also a very timely project to make our buildings fit for the future, regardless of how they might be used going forward.
I've noticed in Glasgow, there are 3 large, very large churches that have been converted into pubs and theaters. That the attendance isn't as prolific as it once was. But I have one final question, Jack. From my point, that the church community, is there an idea of also building climate resilience? And I think of what's happening in communities, rising poverty, the cost of food, what kind of role the church plays in helping to provide food security for its population, and how that intersects with the idea of net zero.
I think there is joined up thinking in viewing the climate catastrophe as being intermeshed with the other crisis which we're facing as a country and as a world. The Scottish Episcopal Church is quite a socially justice orientated church, so I think that the messaging which is developed and implemented in individual churches throughout the country is one which links daily struggles to global struggles and contextualizes them. I think we try to build resilience physically in our church buildings and in due course with our biodiversity efforts in making the most of our church nature holdings. And in the more community-based practical sense, we try to build resilient communities by empowering people to take ownership of their emissions, their buildings, but try to provide them as much support as we can. That's naturally out with my job roles with respect to food security or empowerment in those ways. But from what I am aware of, it is a church with very joined up thinking in terms of recognizing the crisis that we're facing in society across various different sectors.
Not an easy problem. And we don't really know yet what's coming because the problems are mounting on every front. Does anybody else have any burning questions for Jack?
I have a question for Angela. And Angela, I was wondering if you could just stay on for a minute, like at the end, if you have a second.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
I have another Jack question. I heard something the other day and I didn't have a way to look it up, and I just shared a link. But either the Catholic Church or the Episcopal Church somewhere in the UK, I think, has a requirement of a certain amount of land on the church campus that has to be dedicated to climate. Do you know anything about that?
Don't know anything about that. The Scottish Episcopal Church. The reason that I've been mentioning that most of our churches are from the early Victorian period is not to get too into the weeds of history, but during the Jacobite rebellion in Scotland, to sum it up, the Episcopal Church was on the wrong side, or rather the losing side. And all of our land holdings, for the most part, were taken, and many churches were destroyed, both part of the Reformation and part of that. So the land holdings that we have are not really that significant, not really that much out with the actual curtilage of the church buildings and the associated gardens. So we don't have a massive strategy on that because there actually isn't that much land to do. If that were to be, I'd say it's probably the Church of England, which you put the link there. I know that they are, I think, like the third biggest landholder in England, but that could be wrong. But I think they're definitely one of the largest ones, like them and the royal family. And they do have strategies for that. And I know there are like massive pressure campaigns for the church to rewild a lot of their land. As far as I know, that is something which is being moved forward, but I can't really speak with too much certainty on it.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you, Jack. I think I speak for all of us when I extend our heartfelt gratitude for this really illuminating presentation, for the discussion. I wish your movement well and that it spreads across all faiths. It's an important avenue for helping us reach our climate goals across the globe, no matter what the faith is. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, yeah.
See you next month. We will be holding a climate cafe, our annual COP roundup. It will be COP 30, which is taking place in Brazil, in Amazonia. And we will be holding our annual COP roundup on, I think, the 24th, Monday, the 24th of November. The event page isn't up, but keep that in mind. We would love to discuss with everybody what's going on at the international level, especially now that the US has completely withdrawn from the COP process. So have a nice week, nice month.